Welcome to Neuroflow, brought to you by the Neurodiversity Ambassadors. Neuroflow aims to foster caring for the neurodiverse, creating a welcoming society for all, and celebrate neurodiversity. Each episode, we will host a new guest speaker diving into their thoughts on neurodiversity and the neurodiverse experience. I'm your host, Hasini. Today's guest is Mrs. Jane Conklin, a special education teacher at Ridge High School. Mrs. Conklin, would you like to give a short introduction for yourself?
Sure. My name is Jane Conklin. I work at Ridge High School in the CBAP program, which is the Comprehensive Behavior Analytic Program. Mostly I work with autistic students, but in town I've actually worked at Mount Prospect, William Annan, and the high school. In our program, we're kind of moved around to wherever the need is. So I've worked with all different levels in terms of age of students. And this will be my first year working with students in the postgrad, which is 18 to 21-year-olds, which involves a lot of job training and community work and teaching.
Wow, that's great. You seem to have had a lot of experience in this field.
Yeah, I've been doing it for a while. I actually started out as a special ed elementary ed teacher, not in this particular field, and I did that for 8 or 9 years, and then I had kids, so I took a little time off, and then I came back as an aide for a little while. I got my BCBA, which is my Board Certified Behavior Analyst certification, and then went into this specific field. So it's kind of neat. I actually live in town. My kids went through the school system, and I get to work in the same school system as well, which is actually quite an amazing system for all levels of kids.
That's amazing. What would you say was the most inspiring thing for you to serve those who are neurodiverse?
So for me, I've always just been interested in their thought process. You know, I'm fascinated with the nuances of what, it's just different than how we, as neurotypical people, might think. It's like a different language. So there are times where, somebody who's neurodiverse does something. And when I can figure out, because there's always logic behind it. There's always a reason that something is happening, even if it seems illogical to me. When I can figure out what it is. Wait, why did they do that? Oh, I remember 3 days ago I did this and that made them think of that and that. Whatever it is, there's always some connection. It's like a puzzle piece almost. And when I figure that out, and then I can help them in one way or another to process whatever they need to process, to figure me out or to figure out their environment, I find that just so fascinating. And then on a personal level, So a couple of years ago, my 98-year-old great aunt passed, and she had a child with a disability. And so if you think about the fact that she was 98, when he was born, and around that time was kind of the time where there was absolutely no inclusion. When she found out that he had a disability, she went to the doctors, and the doctors said, put him away. You don't have to deal with this embarrassment. I mean, that's the way it was. This was the 50s, the 60s. That's the way it was. The mothers they were labeled as refrigerator mothers, especially for kids who are autistic. And the mothers they claim that it's the mother's fault that the kid is this way. So you had this double whammy of a kid who you didn't know necessarily how to help. And then you have a whole society looking at you like you are the problem. And this is a big embarrassment. So she was the forerunner of all of the laws for the people with disabilities and, the changes that were made over time. And, the fact that she lived to 98 meant that I was an adult working in the field while she was still alive and totally with it. And she up until her son actually died a year before she did, But up until that point, he was in a group home, but she was involved with all of the people in the home. So you're talking about a 97-year-old woman all the way throughout her entire life doing this and caring for a child in any way possible. And she was so wonderful with it. She had friends from when her son was 20 who were still talking with her. And so we would have conversations, and she would hear what was happening now. What do we do for the kids that are in these situations now and the families that are in these situations now? And it would bring her to tears to just hear the difference of what we have now versus what she had to go through. And so I see that, and I see that my role is not just for the students. My role is for the families, because this is for some families, and all neurotypical people are different and have different levels of needs. But for some families, this is a lifelong situation. And not only that, is after their lives. What happens to their children after this? And they have to think about that. So that's a big part of my, why I do this, to help the students that I have become as independent as possible, and the families that I have, be able to function as best they can and help them through all of the times that they have to deal with throughout their lives.
Wow, that's a very inspirational story. Thank you for sharing that. Our next question would be, what do you think is the greatest merit of being a special education teacher?
So when I started teaching in college, and this was very different than it is now, I was told you need to get your special ed degree and your elementary ed degree or you won't get a job. So you would, let's say, apply for a job as a third grade teacher, and there would be 200, 300 people applying for that same job. So they were not wrong. I would go into an interview for a third grade teacher, and they wouldn't even, they called me in because I had a special ed degree, and they'd say, oh yeah, we have this third grade teaching position open, but here's the position we would like you for. So when I started, it wasn't necessarily the plan to work in special ed, but that's kind of where the jobs were. I actually started as a part-time elementary ed half the day and special ed the other half of the day, and so I got experience with both, which was interesting. But I very quickly moved into special ed, and I find that it's a field that's, you have to have patience. You have to really understand that the gains are not so obvious so quick. But I had a student who I taught him to make his own sandwich, but it took all year. And the whole thing was, different levels of prompting him, prompting meaning like, do we point to the sandwich? Do we, tell him verbally to do this piece of it? And when you think about making a sandwich, there's, 25 steps to it, honestly. It's more than you would imagine, even just getting the items and then putting the items away. The fact that he made the sandwich after a year, that's meaningful. Or in my classroom, because I work with a bunch of aides as well, let's say a student says thank you because I gave him something. Everybody, and maybe he never did that before, everybody in the class is like, oh, did you hear that? Oh my gosh, he said wow, he did it. So it's just that the little things are big things. And I think that often people who teach neurotypical students aren't really exposed to that. And they don't always get the bigger picture. You can hear it in the teacher's room. Oh, this kid didn't hand in their homework, or this happened. And I'm thinking, what happens in my classroom is just such a big thing, even though they're tiny. So I think that's what inspires me to keep doing what I'm doing.
That sounds perfect. Like, even the smallest changes that you impact on a student's life would probably bring you so much happiness that I can totally relate to them.
Yeah, and it's so cool because everybody is on the same page. I mean, when the kid said thank you, that doesn't normally say thank you, I immediately texted the parents too, and I was like, oh my gosh, your kid just said thank you when I handed them something, and they were thrilled too. So everybody who's in that world kind of gets it. They get why it's a big deal.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions surrounding neurodivergent students, and how would you address these misconceptions?
I think the biggest one is that kids who are neurodivergent, particularly the autistic people, are not social. That seems to be a big misconception, and it's not the case at all. I mean, just like neurotypical people, there are kids that prefer to be more social than others, but the idea of not being social is just totally incorrect. It's a matter of, maybe they are interested in hotels, right? And if you're somebody who talks to them about hotels, well, they're super social with you. This is their interest, and they want to talk to somebody about it. So I think that's one of the biggest assumptions. And I think it's so the three indicators of often looked at by doctors when you go in and say, oh, is my child autistic, is do they have some deficits with different social things, with communication? Are they doing repetitive movements or rigid? And we say deficits, but really that's an old thought process. It's really differences, right? So we have social norms that the society sort of expects, looking somebody in the eye, whatever those things are, that maybe our autistics aren't doing. But I think if we understood their language and their way of communicating, we would realize that they're just as social as we are, just in a different way.
So that reminded me of the show I was watching. It was called Atypical, and it was starring an autistic character who loved to talk about penguins. And he'd be the least interactive when you were talking about something else, but even the slightest glimpse of a penguin in the conversation would make him talk so much that it was a wonderful show, and I could really relate to it as you were talking.
Yeah, no, I actually I just am fascinated by the whole field, so I saw that show too, because it's anytime something like that comes out, I want to see it.
That's great. What can neurotypical students do to be more inclusive and welcoming of neurodivergent students?
I think, talk to them. They're there. Now I don't know how wide our audience is. We're in Ridge. We have or in Basking Ridge, we have a large population of neurodiverse students. But anywhere there are students, whether they're special ed students, whether they're neurodiversity, whatever it is, they're there. They're sitting in the lunchroom half the time by themselves at a table. You can see that they're there. The neurotypical person can go up and place yourself next to them, and have conversations with them. Find them in the community. In Basking Ridge, we have the PEC, which is Parents for Exceptional Children, which is an amazing organization. They are constantly asking for volunteers to help with all different events. Sometimes families just need respite for a little bit and they want somebody to come, or families want, can you match me up with a neurotypical 13-year-old who plays video games so that my son could join them in that. So there's just so many opportunities to find in order to integrate yourself into that. And there's peer mentor programs starting in the very early on, I think 3rd grade, 4th grade, all the way through the high school. So I think those are good ways to do that, sort of educate yourself as to what is out there. And that's not always easy because sometimes there's, it's hard to find things on a website and that kind of thing. But you could even talk to whatever school you're in, talk to your guidance counselor and say, what is here? What are the programs? Who is a teacher I can connect with who work with the because sometimes the teachers know more than the guidance counselors in terms of what's out there program-wise. So that's one thing. The other thing is just the idea of wait time. When you're talking to any kind of student who might have a processing delay of some sort, any kind of neurodiverse student or a special ed student, so many people, and this includes teachers and aides that aren't aware, you'll ask a question, what is your name? And the student doesn't answer right away. So a typical thing is, wait 2-3 seconds, and then the person will say, tell me what your name is. Here now you just gave them 2 instructions. The first one, what is your name? That's going into their brains. They're processing it. They're trying to come up with some answer to say out loud. And then the second instructions come in at the same, and now it's confusing. What are they actually asking me? So sometimes it's just a much longer wait time than you would imagine for a neurotypical kid. And that also goes for the kids who have devices. Because if you think about, so a lot of our students have, when I say have devices, they have computerized ways of speaking because they're not vocally verbal. So I could have a student, you say hi to them, they're taking their device out of their pocket, they're finding hi, they're finding how are you. It's going to take a good 30-45 seconds, which in our normal interactions, you say hi, they say hi, we're done in 3 seconds or less. So it's that idea that, just being aware that you might need to wait longer than you would think you need to. At the same time, if you're waiting 30 seconds and they're not answering, it's not wrong to ask again or to sort of continue to try to have an interaction. Sometimes people will think, oh, they're just not going to answer me, and then move on. And that's not the case either. If the expectation is that they'll answer, they often will. But it's sort of subtle in that they know this person expects me to answer, and this one is just going to, turn aside quick, so I don't have to do it.
Yeah, as I hear you, I think it teaches a lot of patience as well while talking to people with neurodiverse abilities.
Yes, absolutely. Patience and just an understanding of differences.
Yeah. Could you briefly sum up the biggest challenges that you might have faced as a teacher?
Yes, so now this is for my population of students, and it's not like this for all populations. Again, when you meet someone with autism, you meet one person with autism. You're not meeting, the autistic community. Everybody is completely different, just like neurotypical people are. But in order for my students to communicate their needs, sometimes they do it in ways that are not socially appropriate or even safe. So it's sometimes that's the hardest thing, is sort of understanding or reading what it is that they are needing. So if they need a break, they may not know to ask for a break or be able to ask for a break, but they may take whatever item is in front of them and throw it across the room or hit us or do something. And it's sort of figuring out what is it that that they're trying to tell us, and how can we teach them to do it in a way that is appropriate and safe for everybody in the room and for themselves, because some of my students will also hit themselves if something's bothering them. So that is a big challenge, and that's something that we have to deal with and try to help. And that's a big challenge for the families too, because this is something that sometimes it is a safety issue in their own homes. The other thing is, like, I've had students in my class just start crying, and I don't know why, because a lot of my students are either not vocally verbal or they don't have that much language. And that's hard, when they're just, something's wrong, or if they're sick or something hurts and they're not able to tell us. It's just heartbreaking when that happens. And we try, we'll ask them questions, but sometimes it's just, we're not capable of communicating with them, whether it's us not understanding or them not being able to impart that knowledge. And that's probably one of the toughest things we have to deal with.
What are some ways you think the special education system could be improved, maybe?
we don't have enough resources. That's the bottom line. So, you know, in terms of my program, you know, for the types of students I have, we need a lot of aides, a lot of staff. And in general, the reality is, and this gets worse as they get older. Once they're out of school, it's even worse. You know, there's not resources for the people who are in our community, whether it's homes, whether it's, you know, day programs, whether it's aides. You know, the aides are not paid a decent living wage. You know, they're paid, but they're not paid enough for what they do. And so you can't get that many of them. The people who are there either have somebody who has a secondary income that are able to financially support them, or they're moving to their next step, but this is their stepping stone, or they are absolutely in love with this field, but it's not necessarily sustainable for everybody, and that is a problem. Also, there's just not enough training in general in this society, in the teacher. You know, in some parts of the population nowadays, diversity and inclusion, social emotional learning is like a bad word for some reason. Like there are people that say that we can't teach that. We're only teaching the, you know, reading, writing, and arithmetic type thing. And that's what we need. That's what the teachers need. That's what the students need. It's that training piece to understand in all areas of like diversity. I think that we just don't have enough of that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Although that in your previous example, how you were talking about your great aunt's son, things have got better, but I'm sure they could get even better in future.
Oh yeah, I mean, things have gotten a lot better from then, and they are constantly changing. I mean, the field that I'm in, which is applied behavioral analysis, it has a bad rap from some of the stuff previously that happened, but that's not the way the field is now. The field has changed to match. You know, we have a whole ethics code, and the ethics code has changed to match a lot of what is, you know, we're hearing from the autistic community of what is important, what isn't important. Even something as simple as, you know, eye contact, you know, finding out afterwards that is something that doesn't always work for all autistic people. It could be, in fact, painful for some people who are autistic. And just learning that, you know, that was a big push that we would teach that because it was socially significant. But just learning that those, you know, the society does change. It doesn't always change as fast as I would like, maybe, but it is changing, you know, for the most part for the better, which is good.
That's great to hear. What is the next step we can take as a society to be more inclusive to neurodiverse people?
I think we need to change our expectation. I think our expectation on social norms is sort of a construct. Like you're supposed to look somebody in the eye. You're supposed to stand this distance, even culturally. You know, if you're in Italy and you're standing one distance and you're in the US and you're standing another, one of them would be labeled a close talker and the other wouldn't, you know. So I think we have to be aware that our expectations it doesn't all have to be the same. It's not an us versus them. It's just a different way of being. And if we can understand that level of communication, it, you know, differs, and just try to listen to people, that would be a big thing. The other thing is that there are a lot of neurodiverse people that we don't know that they're neurodiverse. You know, you have people in your classes or in your workplaces, and, oh, that person's weird, you know, they do this, they do that. And we have no idea what it is that their thought process is, or even where they're coming from, or what their history is, or what happened to them that day. So I think the less personally we take things, the less we judge people, the better off we would be as a society.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn from that. Are there things that you have learned from your students over the years?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of interesting facts. The kids that I have that are vocally verbal, they get really into certain things. So it's really, it's a lot of fun working with my students. I would say that on a broader level, you have parents, especially in certain towns, that, oh my gosh, we need to get this number on the SAT. We need to get this college is where we have to go, And here I am in a classroom where it's like, that kid learned how to unpack their school bag, So it's the perspective. It's the broader perspective, I think, is one of the bigger things that I've learned.
That's a very big learning. Are there any specific events that you would like to share with us regarding your students' interest towards their hobbies and their talents? And what particular activities do you wish were more available for neurodivergent students?
I have, there's that piece of students who are autistic who some of them have these talents that are just extraordinary. I had a student who, if a ringtone came on your phone and you gave him a keyboard, he would find the actual sound from your phone and then he would play it exactly as it sounded. If you said hi to him, he wouldn't say hi to you, but he could do that, So it's like these really cool things. A student who you ask them, what is the day of my birthday I think you guys know who I'm talking about, in, 2030, and they'll know the day, it's just these interesting skills that some of the students have that I find fascinating. But I think the opportunity for neurotypical students is just finding places to interact with the students. There's a lot of things at Ridge, or, in other schools. There's unified sports. If you're into sports, there's social skills club, there's the PAC community. It's just tough because the neurotypical kids are so busy with a lot of things that are very important. And so it's hard sometimes to find that, cut out that little piece of time where you're interacting with the students that I have.
Yeah. Our last question for you for today. Is there any advice that you would like to give to individuals who are interested in becoming special education teachers?
Yeah, do it. Right now the field is really open, and it's really exciting field. There's a lot of different ways to be a special ed teacher. There's what I'm doing, but there's just different. You could be an in-class support teacher. You could be a teacher of the deaf. You can be, a speech teacher. There's just so many different opportunities for whatever you're interested in. The only thing I would say is that it is a field with a high level of burnout because there are difficulties. So if I would say if somebody is going into the field, it's really important to get a mentor early on, somebody who really knows what they're doing, who's positive, because you sometimes have those teachers that are burned out and it's like they're done. You don't want to hear from them. Just stay away from them. You get a mentor or somebody who can guide you, because the first 2 or 3 years is just the growth curve is huge. So in the beginning, expect to feel like you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. And if you do that, if you feel that way, you're probably doing it right. If you think you're great, you're probably not doing it right in the first year or two. And just, find yourself that person, because our administrators they may be great and nice and wonderful, but they don't have the time always to work with the teachers in the way that somebody who's in the field, who's there doing all of the little pieces every day, could help. And I think when you have something like that, you're more likely to stay in the field than be completely overwhelmed and be like, no, I can't do this. Well, that would probably be that way for every field, but this just has a very high burnout rate. So that's what I would say for that.
Thank you. I'm sure people would love to hear that advice from you. Thank you for today. It was an honor to meet you and talk and discuss about several important questions that I'm sure many of us would have, and learn from you about the various talents that neurodiverse students express, and how you're very inspiring to, I'm sure, a large community and us too, about how you took up this role, and it's just awesome to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, I appreciate it. This
Thank
has
you.
been fun.
Thank you for tuning in to our third episode of Neuroflow.